Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 6, 2015, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor and a pleasure to be in this somewhat hallowed hall. Election behind us, it's time to look ahead. But as everyone who studies history knows, those who fail to learn from history are destined to repeat it. And so we go. We continue too often to repeat the mistakes of the past, but it looks like the American people wanted a change. Quite a change. And I know there are calls that we get rid of the Electoral College, but when one looks at the map of the United States, district by district that voted within the states that voted for the different parties, candidates, one sees very clearly that you have the big cities that were voting Democrat, the 90% or so of the rest of the country voted Republican. It really is amazing to see just how distinctive that has become. South Texas is not highly populated, but is blue, but otherwise most of the country that voted Democrat they're just large cities, many of which are failing, many of which have become sanctuary cities, many of which have high crime rates. And so I was a bit encouraged to continue to hear statements made by President-elect Trump. There's an article today with regard to the government, that is, the Washington Examiner, or from the Washington Examiner by Paul Bedard, $42 billion in Obama regulations are on Trump's chopping block. That includes nearly 50 massive and costly regulations that cost Americans and businesses 53 million or more hours filing paperwork, and they've already put a $42 billion hit on the U.S. economy, are being teed up for President-elect Trump to cut in his first weeks in office. And you go through and you look, top on the list are Head Start performance standards. Because, really education was doing pretty well in my home state. Back before President Carter created the Department of Education, between 70-75% of all employees in the education system in Texas were teachers. But when you create this big bureaucracy called the Department of Education, it means for every cubicle we put here in Washington, D.C., just down the street here at the Department of Education, every state has to hire additional people to work in cubicles, but some states are more generous than others. Some have very nice offices. But then for every bureaucrat you put in a state capitol office that's going to respond to the bureaucrats in the Department of Education here, you have to have additional clerical help, administrative help in each individual school district. That's people that could be helping our children. That's people that could be making students brighter than any other students. But what are they doing? They're filling out mountains of paperwork to send to the state capitol so they can fill out mountains of paperwork and send it to the Department of Education. And to see that just one item within the Department of Education could cut $42 billion in Obama regulations. That's incredible. At a time when we have skyrocketed over the last 7+ years, from $11 billion in debt to $20 billion in debt, just incredible, incredible. And yet there is so much we're costing America. I'm excited about the coming year because the kind of things that are listed here, it's just government overregulation, government bureaucrats from here overregulating. And I know most people are proud when they set new all-time records, which this administration did in new regulations for the years with regard to pages of regulations. I think the Bush administration seems like they may have hit 74,000 pages or so one year, but that didn't create a problem for the Obama administration. They've blown right past 74,000 pages of regulations. How is anyone in business in the United States supposed to stay in business if they have to go through 74,000 pages of new regulations in addition to the old regulations that may still be in effect? I mean, it's incredible. And like the Heritage Foundation has pointed out, probably most Americans are committing 3 or 4 federal crimes every day because we don't know what all the regulations are. And I'm very encouraged as we go into the new year that one of the things we want to accomplish, and our Chairman Goodlatte and Judiciary Committee has it on his list of things to get done, is really address the over-criminalization that has occurred over all these years. You slap a prison sentence on some vague crime or on some vague statute that says it's a crime if you violate any of the laws or regulations, and then bureaucrats sit around and dream up things that annoy them, and all of a sudden somebody can be going to prison for things none of us knew were crimes. Like the one guy, he did know that a substance he was sending through the mail, since he was a scientist, required ground only, so he checked a box, ground only. He didn't know that some bureaucrat had passed or had created a regulation that said not only do you check the box, you have to put a little sticker on there with an airplane with a red line through it. And if you don't do that, you get arrested, drugged to Alaska where he was sending it. He didn't even live, didn't have friends, and held up there for 18 months or so, I think. But it's incredible. We have got to do right by the American people. I've been blessed to be able to travel all over the country in the past year or so. And everywhere I go, it just seems like the economy is ready to take off. If we can just get this massive, oppressive bureaucracy in Washington off of the neck of the economy, people will start having jobs again. And I know some people are worried about the wall or fence, but as you see people out of work, some of them being paid to apparently to riot or picket, things they do. I remember one picketer out here in the mall back during the shutdown said he was getting $15 an hour from the Democratic sources to picket out there at the World War II monument. But some of them get paid. Maybe that's all the work they can find. Well, how great would it be to take that picket sign out of their hand and say, my friend, we have productive work for you. You can help your country. You can help yourself by cutting down on potential terrorism that's coming across our southern border, by cutting down on people coming into the country illegally and getting welfare, food stamps, all these benefits that other Americans will have to pay for that are here legally. You can take this trowel take this mortar and go over there to that brick pile by our border and just start helping us build the wall. We will pay you to do that. And, you know, I don't know, they may want if they get $15 an hour to come picket in Washington, they may want 16 or 17 to help build the wall or the fence down on our border. But we've certainly got plenty of people that can work, because you see them in the streets all over the country. They've come out of their safe spaces where their feelings were hurt because things didn't go like they wanted. And nobody has told them, as my late mother, brilliant as she was, used to say, well, nothing's fair, and the quicker you get used to it, the better off you'll be. I would contend, and she would roll her eyes, that, yeah, but we can take care of our own little part to make it more fair, and that's what we're supposed to do. If things are not fair, then you get involved in government and you try to fix it. That's why I came to Washington. I saw that things weren't fair up here, that the federal government was luring people away from their God-given potential, because I kept having young women come before me as a felony judge in Texas for welfare fraud, and the cases were nearly identical when they pour out their hearts, lay out their situation. They were bored with high school, and somebody said, well, the federal government will send you a check. You just drop out and have a baby. And then they find out after they have a child, I can't really live on this little bit. This is not enough to live on. So they have another child, another child. And these are just the ones that came to my court. But I would imagine that there are other situations just like this all over the country. And when I was teaching a joint sociology class at a predominantly African-American school back in Tyler, Texas. It's a great school. It's done so much good for so many, Texas College. But there were women in there, probably in their late 20s, and when we started talking about this, I was blown away with the intellectual level of these women and their commitment that we have to fix our federal system that is destroying people and their potential. And one lady in her older 20s, God bless her, she came back. She decided, I've had kids, I've been in debt, I am going to improve myself. I mean, that's the American dream. That's what we hope for. She said, you got to put that work requirement, you got to make it more forceful. And another lady said, yeah, and you got to put a drug test on there because, man, I was spending my money I was getting from the government, not much for my kid, but for my drugs. You need to have a drug test. Don't just give people money like that. You're ruining them. And I'm hearing people across the country that have figured out this massive welfare state that was created with the best of intentions in the mid-'60s has done more to pull people away from their God-given potential and put them into ruts or ditches from which they couldn't get out of. And yet that is not supposed to ever be the role of government. Whether you look to biblical scripture like I do, Romans 13, the government is supposed to be an encourager of good conduct. Help people, encourage them, direct them to reach their potential. Don't lure them away from their potential and make them beholden to this big master government. Encourage them. We need a safety net here and there, but encourage them. The sky's the limit, and get out of the way. And like Edison said, you know, I didn't fail however many hundreds of thousands of times. I tried to find the filament that would make a light bulb work. He didn't fail all those times. He just found that many ways that would not work in a light bulb. Then he found the one that would. You encourage people to try. Failure shouldn't necessarily win a trophy, but it ought to get a slap on the back. Come on, you can keep going. You can do it. The government should not lure people away from trying. It was never intended to be anything but a safety net so you could rebound and get back on your feet. Instead, we take people off their feet and lead them away from being productive in the country for themselves. And I've mentioned this before, but I was, as a freshman in Congress 12 years ago, went to a conference at Harvard, and one of the speakers, dean there, I was surprised, dean at Harvard Business School, and he had these charts, and he showed single mother's income in the United States when adjusted for inflation from the creation of welfare until welfare reform from mid-60s to mid-90s, when Newt Gingrich and Republicans took the Congress in January 95, did welfare reform. I know President Clinton now takes credit for it, but he vetoed it. It wasn't until they had enough votes basically to override his veto that they finally got him on board, and now he likes to take credit for it. It was the Republicans that drove them there. He likes to take credit for the balanced budget. He vetoed numerous things that would have made it balanced, and once they had the votes that would override his veto, he would sign them. And we got to a balanced budget back in the late 90s. But that's what we're going to have to do come January, and we can't give away the farm when we come back. And I'm encouraged today to hear our speaker and leader talking about what we're going to be doing. And wow, isn't it wonderful that now that Donald Trump is the president-elect, Republican leadership is now saying, you know what we're going to do is we need to take care of the military so we don't suffer there any more than we already have for 8 years, but maybe get that done for the rest of the year, and then basically have a continuing resolution that gets us out maybe to March, so that we can come in with the Congress, the people of the United States. They now want making the decisions. That makes sense. They've spoken. Let's let that Congress make the big calls. And then with the new president, when he comes in January. What's so great about that is some of us were talking about that back in September, and then we were told, no, we've got to do it for the whole year, and we're going to have to add this and that, everything for the whole year. A new president's elected named Trump, and all of a sudden, hey, let's just go to March. Sounds great to me. That sounds like a good idea. I would have been willing to do that in September, as we were talking about then. It wasn't acceptable then. I'm glad it's acceptable now for a new Congress. And when we talk about problems in the United States, our military has been deflated back to pre-World War II position. We were not a superpower after World War I. We weren't the main defender of truth, justice, freedom. But as you travel around the world, like I mentioned in Africa, where Africans were saying, we were so excited when you elected your first black president, but since he's been in office, we've seen America get weaker and weaker. And you've got to go back to Washington and tell those people there, stop getting weaker. And this was a group of African Christians. And they said, we all know where we're going when we die, but our only chance for peace in this life is if America is strong. Now, the world, so many countries like to deride us and take verbal shots. Some take other kinds of shots, but some like to fly planes closely and mocking our ships. And I'm looking forward to that happening under President Trump. I suspect if it happens, it probably won't happen more than once. But and they'll learn not to mess with us. So it'll be nice to have a reputation. You're not going to continue to bully the world, while this administration likes to talk about bullies in elementary school and send they like to see little kids who were bullies in elementary school arrested, threatened. Well, I was a little bitty kid, and one of my best friends from elementary school was here yesterday. We were talking about old times. He and I were the same little bitty runt size, so we got picked on a lot. But we didn't want anybody to come get arrested, and we figured out ways that we made sure the biggest bully never bothered us again. But to give an elementary school kid an arrest, drag them in. I mean, kids have to grow up, and that's why we're called adults. We're supposed to have learned and it's supposed to understand. Kids will be kids. Foolishness can be found in the heart of a child, but some say maybe Proverbs is encouraging a crime when it says, but the rod can drive it far from them. Nobody wants a child to be abused, but I know most of my friends in school, we got time or another, and I had friends I played football with, whether it was freshman year, junior varsity, or varsity, that if they had not been paddled, I had no doubt they were headed for prison, but they had coaches that cared about them. They didn't just want to win as coaches. They wanted these kids to be good adults. So they used discipline. We had some trouble folks after high school, but the coaches saved a lot of kids by caring. And I've mentioned before that, I had some coaches that I loved, and they're more like friends, even though they were adults. But my favorite year, my favorite coach was Willie Williams. And it was interesting, conservatives are called bigots all the time. First time I mentioned that here in Washington, that my favorite high school coach was happened to be black. And I never noticed any racial problems on that team because he was rough on all of us. He's a very smart man, too. Good coach, and I love Coach Williams. And it was my great honor to be invited back to my hometown a couple of weeks ago when Mount Pleasant was playing Greenville. Greenville's a lot bigger city. Mount Pleasant had won 2 games. Coach Williams is now retired. But I was told Coach Williams was up in the press box, that he did some of the calling color for the games. And there were so many thrills there, getting to know the kids and being with the team on the sideline and rejoicing with good plays. But they won. Apparently it was the best game they played. Those kids have a lot of potential they didn't realize. But gave me the game ball. Just so many things that thrilled me there, my hometown where I grew up, Mount Pleasant. But nothing more than when I got to hug Coach Williams up there at the press box. And that was special. But although he's substantially older now and gray, unfortunately his memory has not waned at all. And Coach Williams remarked, "You had a great team, but it wasn't because you had good talent." That's how I know his memory had not failed him. But you guys played so well together. You gave it everything. You played well together, and that's how you were a winning team. I really had hopes that that's what would happen. I didn't support Barack Obama for president, but I really had hopes that we would be brought together as never before, just the way Coach Williams brought us together on that football team. Thought it was rather ironic. One of the liberal press immediately did a story on my favorite basketball coach in high school. Apparently, they figured since they're liberal, well, black, so I guess blacks are only good at basketball, so he must have been his basketball coach. He was my football coach, JV football coach, before I went to the varsity the next year. But ironic. Who is the more bigoted, I wonder? But nonetheless, it wasn't like our team under Coach Williams. We've become a very divided country. And this article from Fox News, Dakota Wood, just this week, points out our military is no longer large enough, strong enough, or modern enough to keep America safe. And that's why China is making moves in the South Sea. It's why Russia is rattling sabers and looking around them if they should possibly move before a more authoritative president, a more decisive president, like President-elect Trump comes into office. So I think the world is scared for the next couple of months. Are these countries like Iran, Russia, China, are they going to try to make a move in the next 2 months because they know this president may send some rockets or something, may send a SEAL team, but they're not going to really be final type activities to really send a message. So we'll see. Hopefully the threat of President Trump coming in January will be sufficient to keep Iran from trying to make a move on Mecca, Russia from trying to make a move on Georgia, Ukraine, Crimea. Crimea part of Ukraine, of course, should be. But remains to be seen. And then after all of the trauma that's been created, I just can't call it the Affordable Care Act because it's so costly. But the president was proud that it was called Obamacare initially, and so that's a better term. People know what it means immediately, know what we're talking about. But this article from the Washington Free Beacon, Allie Meyer, says 1/3 of adults went without health care due to expensive costs. You know, we were doing so much better. Most of the people I hear from in my district, way over 700,000 people, they were doing a lot better before Obamacare kicked in. They're not going to be able to afford health care next year. That was one of the reasons that 90% of the geographical U.S. voted to change parties at president, because they've seen the suffering they have done because their health care has suffered. This article says 1/3 of adults in the U.S. went without recommended health care due to expensive costs, according to a Commonwealth Fund survey. The survey actually was conducted in 11 countries. So U.S., Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, United Kingdom. And this was all within this year, from March to June of this year. And that's what we find. 1/3 of Americans, now that we've been under Obamacare for 6 years, have really felt the pinch. And some have felt it to their demise or detriment. Another article from Elizabeth Harrington, Obamacare premiums are to increase 27%. It points out a new study obtained by the Washington Free Beacon shows premium increases under Obamacare will actually be higher than the federal government's projections. And it points out there will be 27%. According to the American Action Forum, it points out that the Department of Health and Human Services announced last month that premiums would increase an average of 22% in 2017, but premiums will actually increase as much as 145% in some states. The American Action Forum found that the average increase is likely to be higher than predicted because the agency did not factor in that nearly half of Obamacare plans no longer exist, forcing enrollees to switch to costlier plans if they have them at all. And then we have this from Lana Shadwick. DHS was sued for ignoring environmental effects of mass integration. I mean, there's so much damage that's come from our border not being secured. And I heard one of my friends across the aisle say just this week in the press that our southern border is secure. Mr. Trump should come down and see it. Well, Mr. Trump has come down and seen it. And I've been down there many times. And I mean, to be on the border as I was just in the last months, recent months, and out there on the Rio Grande, which is pretty wide, and yet that's still where so many thousands and thousands and thousands crossed. And 2, 3 in the morning, we were on a Texas Department of Public Safety boat because Texas, though they're not authorized by the Supreme Court to defend borders, they're authorized under the Texas Constitution and required to protect our state. They've spent millions of dollars. They have these fantastic boats. We had night vision on the boat, they have thermal technology. They could see where people were hiding, what they were hiding behind. They have other technology, and when they would see people, they would radio it to the Border Patrol. There were agents on the U.S. side along the riverbank, and we had reported some in. We went down, turned off the engine, and sat there for an hour or so, and finally the U.S. Border Patrol asked if we'd go back to the dock because those people that we had been watching, they were watching with their technology, and they weren't going to move. They knew our boats were there somewhere in the area, and so our boat went back. I thought that meant they were saying, you know, they know you're in the area, so they're not going to make a move. We can't catch them red-handed until you make a move. I thought that meant they would interdict and protect the homeland. No, Homeland Security doesn't protect the homeland. No, what they were saying is, we want you to get out of the way because there are people, and then there were some we could see were clearly carrying stuff that were probably drugs. And only 2 or 3 in those groups of people that were carrying drugs. 17, 18, groups like that would be wanting to come across, and it didn't look like they were carrying anything, maybe had a raft. So it turned out we leave, and we get radio transmission from Border Patrol. Okay, all of those folks that you had spotted, they've now all come across when you left the area. And we've got all of those in the big groups, but we didn't get those that were probably bringing in drugs. But we put somebody out at an intersection. They're going to watch for them. Well, these people are not stupid. They knew the intersection they put them in. They weren't going through that intersection. If I had had any idea that our boat leaving that area of the river, the Rio Grande, was going to cause President Obama's Border Patrol to not protect our homeland, but to keep welcoming drug dealers, massive drugs, and lots of folks. We don't know what diseases they have. We don't know if there were any terrorists in there. We don't really know who they are. They don't carry proper identification. I've seen that time and time and time again on our border in the middle of the night. They're not carrying it. I watched 2 guys. They looked at their own little Xerox piece of paper they used for identification, and they didn't like where they switched. What kind of identification is that? It's a little piece of paper. It had some English on it. They switched. They didn't like the identity they were bringing in. We don't know who these people were. So it will be nice come next year to know that our Border Patrol And they're frustrated. I know most of them, they really have wanted to do their jobs, and I hear from them, and they are so tired of watching their homeland be assaulted. It's just on and on, a wave every night. And we're not protecting our homeland. We're supposed to protect this place against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, some of those folks aren't enemies. They want to come in for jobs. Some want to come in for welfare. Some want to come in for food stamps. Some want to come in, but they've made commitments to the drug cartels that pay the coyotes to bring them across. And as I've been out there at night when they've said, well, no, I didn't have $7,000, but they're going to let me work it off in the city I'm going to. They help them spread poison to American young people. They are bringing poison into our country. They come in with good motivation, wanting jobs, wanting a better life. And yet we have allowed such a massive insurgence into this country that if we don't take some kind of pause and kind of figure out who in the world is in this country, we know from FBI Director Comey, such as his testimony is worth, that there's terrorist cells in every state that they're investigating, every state. So we need to figure out who all have we let in here. I mean, in the last 8 years, and yes, it was going on during the Bush administration, but nothing like has just amassed in the last 8 years. We got to figure out who's here. Even this administration had no idea who they've let in. And then when you see the article that indicates that the number of those wrongly given citizenship is much higher than initially reported, and this is from Jake Tapper with CNN, that the number of individuals who were supposed to have been deported but were instead granted citizenship higher than was initially reported by the media covering Homeland Security. On Monday, the Inspector General reported that 800, and this was from September, but 858 individuals from special interest countries, meaning countries that are considered to be of concern to the national security of the United States, were supposed to have been deported, were instead granted U.S. citizenship. But the truth is, the report is even worse than was reported. More than 1,800 individuals naturalized who should have been deported from this country. A reason for the underplaying of the number may have been the report's focus, which was whether U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services was using digital fingerprints effectively. So it goes on to say, there may be 1,000 more, 953 more that they didn't realize. They were supposed to deport because they're probably going to kill people, create havoc here. And, with all the rhetoric we've heard over and over, we don't need a fence, we don't need a wall. This campaign, you don't need any fence or wall down on our border. WikiLeaks, and who knows, where this stuff was coming from. But I never did hear outright denials. So, well, we're not sure where that's coming from. Yeah, but they're saying this was your email. Did you send this email? I just didn't hear people denying the facts that were in what was released. And anyway, they leaked an internal memo from Barack Obama's 2008 campaign, and it made very clear that then Senator Obama believed that fencing at the U.S.-Mexico border could help cut down on illegal immigration. Of course, once he's in office, we hear his surrogate, Janet Napolitano, saying, if you build a 10-foot wall, they'll build a 12-foot ladder. So what do? They build a 10-foot fence around the White House. After she made fun of a 10-foot fence, they built a 10-foot fence, make it higher around the White House. And I asked, does that fence work? Because if it works, then we need to have something like that down on our border. If it doesn't work, then let's remove the fence from around the White House. But the Obama administration, though they clamored that fences would do no good, made their fence even stronger, bigger, taller, more secure around the White House. So I know they said fences didn't work, but their actions said pretty clearly, yes, we know they work. That's why we're fixing ours up around the White House. In my own home county, November was a very, very sad time. A little girl, 10 years old, Kayla, was finally found. Had friends around the country texting, emailing, we're praying for Kayla. Well, they finally found 10-year-old Kayla. Our Smith County Sheriff, Larry Smith, reported that Kayla's body was found in a well next to a home rented by her relative 4 days after her disappearance. Sheriff said, we assure you there will be no stone unturned as we enter the next phase of this investigation. And that's what they did. And they arrested Gustavo Zavala Garcia. He was in the country illegally. He had been deported for a violent crime in 2014, but because this federal government refused to protect the United States of America from all enemies foreign, this guy comes back in and killed Kayla. That's the charge. We've seen this across the country. And I know President Trump has said he's going to do something about it, and God help us, he needs to. In government, we have a job. As an individual Christian, I'm supposed to turn the other cheek, but when I'm acting in the role of the government, my job is to make sure those who have religious beliefs can practice and keep their religious beliefs without worrying about some guy that's been deported 5 times coming in and shooting them. And if we find here in Congress that the executive branch is not doing what they should, then we cut off the money. That's what's supposed to happen. Cut off the money to those who aren't doing the job and send it over to people that are doing the job. And if nobody's doing the job, then create another department and eliminate that department and get somebody until you do protect the country. There are so many across this country that are suffering, mourning the loss because the federal government did not protect them from some who was a criminal, who was deported, and we don't protect our borders, and they came back and they killed, raped, pillaged yet again. And then there are those that say, well, let's just go ahead and do a complete amnesty. Well, this report from Robert Rector, brilliant guy, from the National Academy of Sciences says that the findings in the report indicate if amnesty for illegal immigrants were enacted, the government would have to raise taxes immediately by $1.29 trillion, put that sum into a high-yield bank account to cover future fiscal losses generated by the amnesty recipients and their children. To cover the future costs, each U.S. household currently paying federal income tax would have to pay, on average, an immediate lump sum of over $15,000. Wouldn't it be better to just enforce our borders so that nobody lets in legally as many as we do in the United States? I don't know a single person in this Congress that's a xenophobe, whatever kind of phobe. No, but we want to do our job. And there is an obligation to make sure that the over 1 million visas, more than any country in the world, that are handed out by our United States government go to people that are not going to be a threat, but are to be a blessing to this country. And to have a UN General Secretary, the new one that just came in, say over a year ago, well, the reason there are such a tiny fraction of Christians that are being brought out of the Middle East as refugees is because they're so historically important right where they are. We've already recognized there is a genocide of Christians going on right now in the Middle East. So what do we do with the Christians? The government said, well, we want to leave most of them there. We like what the UN says. Let's leave them over there to be wiped out in a genocide of Christians. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, there will be a price to pay someday for this country for our callousness to Christians and Jews in the Middle East that have cried out for help. And instead of helping them, we have welcomed those who have tortured and created a living hell for them. And one from September 10th, suspect in brutal Maryland murder, deported twice. Austin sexual assault suspect, previously deported 5 times. And then this administration has, sent billions of dollars, a lot of it cash. Load up those pallets, put them on the plane, send them to our enemy, Iran. And we find out there was an IAEA report indicating that Iran had continued to violate the Iran Executive Agreement. It's really a treaty, but the Senate never confirmed it, never ratified it. So it can be wiped out as soon as Trump goes out. I know I saw a headline, he doesn't think he'll do that. I'd suggest he needs to do that. It was a rotten deal, and there will be a lot of people in the Middle East and around the world, including America, who will die because this administration sent billions of dollars to Iran, big hunk of it, just pure cash. And this article says Iran's pressuring Palestinian jihadists to resume their terrorism against Israel. But they don't just do terrorism against Israel. They love to kill, do harm to Americans. It's time we stood up to our oath and protected this place, protected our Constitution, our way of life against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's basically the oath I took when I went on active duty in the Army. We didn't know if we were going to be sent. We weren't sent anywhere. We were put on alert in 1979 when an act of war occurred in Iran, but President Carter wouldn't defend our people, he tried way too late and way too weakly to rescue, but even a successful rescue would have told the world, we don't have a leader in America that will protect the American people, because if you harm us, then we'll come back and get out of your country, but we'll leave you alone. I mean, this was President Carter that called Ayatollah Khomeini, the biggest radical Islamic terrorist in modern history, a man of peace, when he was welcoming him to the power of an entire country and its military. Radical Islamic Caliphate had been out of business for many years. Carter opened the box, and once Pandora's box was opened, many thousands and thousands of our American military would die in the days to come because of it. Not just military, but when a Taliban, radical Islamist terrorist, in Afghanistan get control of the country, there's going to be terrorism spread around the world. That's what happens. When a radical Islamic terrorist becomes the head of Iran, there's going to be terrorism spread around the world, and that happened. Now, this leaked FBI data report reveals 7,700 terrorist encounters in the United States in 1 year, and the border states were the most targeted. But Andrew McCarthy, a dear friend, wrote a great article, Deadliest Lie. Without Lone Wolf Lie, U.S. could have stopped nearly every attack. As my friend Patrick Poole has said, there are no lone wolves, there are known wolves. Each time we find out these people were on the radar of the FBI, of law enforcement, and they didn't know how to recognize a radical Islamist. So I hope and pray as a new administration comes in that we will finally put the Muslim Brotherhood, CARE, and any of the groups with which it works on a terrorist watch list, stop them from giving advice to the State Department, the White House, the Justice Department, Homeland Security. Stop allowing them to come in and review material and tell us what we have to remove from our training material, so that next time Russia says there's a Sarnia brother that's been radicalized and is going to kill people, the FBI agents who want to stop terrorism actually recognize it because they've been properly trained to do so, instead of being treated with some politically correct garbage that keeps them from recognizing what a real radical Islamist is. You got to know what they're reading. You got to know what the beliefs are. And when I talked to the FBI agent whose material was completely eliminated for a time because apparently CARE, named as a co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation terrorism financing trial, they were bothered by some of that stuff. When I asked the FBI director at that time, Mueller, you didn't even go to the mosques where the Sarnievs went and ask questions. What are they reading? What are they learning? What are they saying? How are they acting? To determine if they've been radicalized. They didn't know what to look for. Mueller said they did go out there, but it was in their outreach program. Yeah, go out there, have a meal, let's get together, be buddies, but not even investigate when the Russians tell you this guy's a radical, he's going to kill Americans. They sent somebody out, they talked to him, talked to his mom. He says, no, I'm not a terrorist. Mom said, he's a good boy, not a terrorist. And then he goes and kills people in Boston at the marathon because they didn't know what they were looking for. It's time to get back to fulfilling our oath to the United States of America, to protect this country, to get government out of the way, to create a level playing field across the country, and then let people compete. And don't reward the losers. Encourage them to pick up and keep going. When they fail, like Edison, it's not a failure. You just found a way not to succeed on that, but you'll find the way next time. We keep trying. It's time to wake up, protect